All right. Well, welcome everyone. Appreciate you taking the time here on the 12th of January for the monthly webinar, January edition of Move to Amend, Building People Power, Lessons from Organized Labor to Pass the We the People Amendment. Now all of a sudden I can't seem to make it work. Of course, that's how it always goes, isn't it? Here, let's just see. Let's go back. Okay, let's go here again. All right, let's try it again. It's the you and I and unions that make us strong. So welcome everyone. The agenda for this evening is as follows, just a couple of call logistics and some introductions of our speakers. Then there'll be program presentations, comments, questions, and close. As far as logistics go, we have, just so that everybody can kind of stay focused, we've turned off the chat. We'll turn it back on after the end. And if you have any questions, comments that you would like to make to the presenters, you can do that at any time. Keon, how do they do that?
If there is a button, Q&A portion right in the bottom of the Zoom window, which you can enter your open questions into there. We will keep the chat closed, but during the presentation, but we'll reopen it once it's once we're done and into the Q&A period. But you can answer your questions now via the Q&A section. If you are having any technical problems, you can raise your hand and I will do my best to chat with you one-on-one to answer your question if it's technical. Yep,
and then we'll monitor those and try to address all those comments or questions when the presentations are over. So thank you very much, everyone, for being here. So everyone is on mute. We're now recording the program. Again, chat questions, comments to the moderator, no chat during presentations, and it'll be open. All right, this is the program. I'm going to give a real quick background of Move to Amend. Lawrence Abbott is going to speak about the history of labor and organizing. Linda Gillison on advocacy, mobilizing, and organizing. And then Keon Bliss on MTA resources on our organizing for those times that are listed. That'll be followed by sort of internal discussion on what we believe are the lessons of organizing workers for Move to Amend, with a few examples that are there that are listed, particularly around Zoom, social media, low power and public radio. Questions and discussions, open-ended, will follow, and then we will close. Here are the presenters. Lawrence Abbott, listed Move to Amend Labor Caucus Co-Coordinator. He's a retired driver warehouseman, Alameda Labor County Council AFL-CIO political organizer, and just for fun, a biologist, community activist, and organizer. He is going to start. Linda Gillison is the other co-coordinator of our Move to Amend Labor Caucus. A retired professor of classics at the University of Montana, steering committee, and a steering committee member of Montanans Move to Amend. Keon Bliss will follow. He's the national grassroots director, and I'm the moderator, and I'm the outreach director of Move to Amend. And again, the program, this is what it's about, right? Trying to build power, people coming together to bring about change, and working people certainly have been at the forefront of doing that. The mission, briefly, a bit of background of Move to Amend, is an organization of hundreds of organizations and hundreds of thousands of individuals committed to social and economic justice, ending corporate rule, and building a vibrant democracy that is genuinely accountable to the people, not corporate interests. And for some reason, I'm not able again to move this screen. And I don't know why. So sorry about that, folks. So let me find this again. All right. Our goal is to, as many of you know, if you're familiar with Move to Amend, is to pass the We the People Amendment, HJR 48, which is to make crystal clear that artificial entities do not have constitutional rights and that money is not a form of First Amendment constitutionally protected free speech. That's the first goal. The other is to provoke discussion and organizing about how to make real the promise of democracy through constitutional renewal. We believe that HJR 48 is a mere stepping stone to much more wider and deeper change that needs to happen constitutionally. We have these 5 core principles and values: committed to anti-oppression and solidarity, organizing in the spirit, certainly, of our brothers and sisters in labor. And what's going on there now? Who knows? And
sorry, I lost your the screen share that you had going. So I was just reactivating it for you.
Okay.
I'm watching a great picture on my screen of some activists there.
Yes.
Exactly.
And right now I can't seem to make it work. So I gotta.
I'm doing the screen share, so if you want to continue, I'm happy to.
Oh, okay. Feel free.
Cool.
All right, so as mentioned, that's our first value and principle. Our second is dedicated to building coalition. That's the only way really these days to build power. And by building a coalition, it's not just for the sake of doing it, but it's to build a movement. And that movement is trying to create power. That's what brings about fundamental change. We're committed to grassroots organizing from the bottom up, dedicated to political education, getting on the other side of the learning curve on issues that we believe are important, that we don't hear about, learn about in school, and even in our activist circles, in the corporate media, and in just about every other arena in our society. And finally, dedicated to political and economic independence. The We the People Amendment, there it is, the 3 provisions, pretty much rights of natural persons only is what we believe. That should be the only rights protected by the Constitution. Federal, state, and local governments shall regulate, limit, or prohibit contributions and expenditures. So that second section is all about money not being defined as free speech. And thirdly, that nothing contained in this amendment shall be construed to abridge the freedom of the press. So first component of the We the People Amendment is corporate constitutional rights are not legitimate. Second, that money is not a form of free speech. Money is not free speech. And third, that nothing in this amendment shall be construed to abridge the freedom of the press. Okay, Keon, you can move it to the next one. And there's just an example of, we have our rights under the Bill of Rights and 14th Amendment when we're in the public sphere, but the moment we step across from the sidewalk onto corporate property, we lose all of those rights. And that's for anyone, particularly workers when they go to their workplace. Forget about First Amendment right of free speech organizing, 14th Amendment due process, 4th Amendment search and seizure, all of that is by the boards. Okay, take it away, Lawrence.
Well, thanks so much. So that cartoon, by the way, is really looks familiar. I've worked for big corporations my whole life as a Teamster, most of my life. And I worked for United Parcel Service and then for Lucky Stores, both of those together for a little over 35 years. And the look on their faces is classic. That's how I felt walking up. So let me tell you my story really quick and why I volunteer for Move to Amend, because Move to Amend has this ragtag group of paid staff. It's pretty small. And you're seeing most of them here on this program today. And all the work really gets done by people like me, people that just step up and organize. So the reason that I do this is because when I was growing up, I listened to talk radio a lot. My mom had it on all the time. My mom was from Germany and my dad was from Colombia, South America. And I was the first one in my family born here in the United States, in the East Bay here. And so I got a good sense of what justice is as a little kid, just listening to talk radio every day. My mom always had it on, and it just fascinated me. But then a few things stuck with me from my public school education. One was that I heard that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And I don't know why it stuck with me, but I guess because of it tied in so much to what I was hearing on the radio about current events during the 1960s and 1970s. And then I was really fortunate to get to go to Humboldt State for wildlife biology. And I had a class that was really interesting called environmental economics. And that professor said that basically all problems of our economic system and government in general, or actually everything that happens in our country, is due to the government's failure to regulate. And the government fails to regulate when special interests are more powerful, basically, than the power of the general public. So when I heard about Move to Amend and started to learn about why we don't have the power and why corporations have so much power and special interests, and with my love of nature and wildlife, I knew that if I spent my retirement years out in the country studying willow flycatchers, say in the Grand Canyon, which I did get to spend years doing, that eventually we're pretty much going to lose everything if we continue to have corporate rule and corporations have our rights. They've basically stolen our Constitution, and that money is their protected free speech. I mean, you really can't make that stuff up. It's so Orwellian, and it's amazing that so many people have pretty much almost accepted that. So what is a labor union? I hope that everybody really gets that. There's a few takeaways that I want you to really grab from this. And in California, we spent years fighting the narrative that we've been hearing from the right wing, that, you know, the union boss is bad for people. And so we came up with our own narrative, which is what is a union? It's working people standing together. And of course, that's for a balance of power with their employer. But if you can just remember that, that's one of the key takeaways of this when you're ever talking about unions or working in solidarity with unions, which I hope you will be doing. Use that slogan. It's really helpful. And so what is organizing? It's really same thing. It's because a union, you know, is organizing. We're standing together in union. I really don't see much difference between, you know, organizing within the union or organizing within the community. It's all creating people power. So why do we organize? We want to get justice. What do we want, right? Justice. When do we want it? Now. So we're not likely to get that as long as corporations have our Constitution. Well, I'll keep going. So when do we organize? And I like to say we organize always, because even though organizing can be a little bit complicated when you study it, and the more you study it, the better, but we can simplify it too. And I'll get into that a little bit. And we really all are organizers. We've been doing that ever since we were, you know, little kids. If we grew up in a family, we started to figure out how to use our power and try to get what we want and what we need. And where and when can we organize? Really any time and place that we're in conversation or building relationships, because deep organizing is really putting yourself out there and building relationships. Nothing can replace that. Next slide, please. And so until the next slide comes up, there it is. So the history of the labor movement, which is usually what we're talking about when we're talking about the history of labor, I don't need to go into it too much because you guys really know enough about it already. There's a really great, if you just do an internet search for the history of the labor movement, about 2 or 3 things pop up that are really great. And one of them is Wikipedia, and you can click on all the key moments of the labor movement, and really, really important stuff. It's of course why we went from the suffering that was happening with industrialization in 1800s to a lot of people having jobs that would be horrible, but they're certainly much better. And many people, of course, get their benefits and healthcare from that. So the history of the labor movement is still being written. It's not like it's something that happened in history. It's something that's ongoing. And we've been struggling. So you can see from the statistics there that we've been moving backwards. And of course, that's as corporations get more and more power, the people's power diminishes. And that includes the working class that really suffers. And I just wanted to mention really quick, if you're from California, you know all about Prop 22. Corporations are so powerful now that the state legislature came up with laws to help gig workers here in the state, like Uber and Lyft and DoorDash workers. Corporations wrote their own law, put it in the proposition system, called it Prop 22, spent millions of dollars and convinced the public to support it. So now corporations know exactly how much it costs to write their own laws and supersede state government here in California. Next slide, please. So what does organizing look like? So it's dedicated leaders really who are, and we're all leaders. That's another thing to really, I think everybody knows that's been working with the community. And organizing to me really is just telling our stories, getting out there and getting involved, and not trying to manipulate other people, but really listening, as you'll find out. If you go to this website, and I highly recommend it, it has really great stuff, and especially a fantastic fact sheet on how to listen. And I think Linda's going to talk about that a little bit too. Next slide, please. So real quick, before I go into this, I want to say that, well, actually, no, as I go into it, because I only have about a minute here. But my favorite organizing techniques, I really learned from labor, but also from Move to Amend. The Movement Education 3.0, I think it's still being called that, is really that we can't have a mass movement of the people without it being inclusive. And that's everybody in, nobody out. That's a real common saying you'll hear in the union movement, and it works just as well with the community. We really can't have a labor movement if we have racism. So our movement has to address racism. And I think finally, you know, what's been happening in the last year, the tragedy that was caught on TV over and over again is showing that. This is a really great book that was, I don't know if you can, well, I'll tell you about it later. It's called Reluctant Reformers by Robert Allen, but it's all about how movements can't happen with racism or any of the isms that exclude people. So anyway, I want to talk really quickly about a technique that I use all the time in organizing, and it's the story of self, us, and now. And I tried to do that a little bit in my talk right now, and that was that I did talk about myself and how we're all in this together, that things are getting much worse, and that now is that we have this chance to do something. And it really is a special time right now because the mask has been taken off. Move to Amend for over 10 years has been telling people that we're headed towards fascism with corporate personhood and money of speech. Now people can really see what it looks like, and we're not even out of the woods yet. We're like right on the edge, on the razor's edge of fascism. So the way that organizing looks in our Move to Amend, we almost don't have to work too hard to organize anymore because most people are already actually organizing and organized and wanting to move along. Most people already support what we're doing. So, and unions now, my union, my Teamsters union has endorsed this. The Labor Council has endorsed this and is yelling at the powers that be at the AFL-CIO National, asking them to come on board. So the way that it looks once we get moving and once you get you know, involved with Move to Amend, we're using these strategies to get to work. And the work is going to happen now, and it's going to happen at light speed now because people are really helping out. So we want to get our reps to co-sponsor, and the union's helping us with that here locally. Most of our reps are already co-sponsored. We want to get candidates to take the pledge to amend, and I think there'll be links here for that. We want to continue to be doing the organizing work and If you look at all the organizations that are part of our coalition, we want to get everybody on board, because this isn't another thing that they're working on. This is actually just a strategy that everybody can use to get the power they need for justice, whether you're working for social justice, or if you're working for environmental justice, or if you're working for union power. Thank you so much.
Well done, Lawrence. And on time.
Almost.
All right, next is Linda Gillison.
Yes, well, thanks a lot. Lawrence, thanks for that beginning from you. And just to point out that what we're talking about is a technique or an approach which can be used by anybody. It can be used in unions, and it has been used in unions, at least the unions that I think of as the best kinds of unions. And but it's just really a matter of working within a community, which can be a very large community or a very small community, in order to build power and build leadership within the community. And I'm going to talk about 3 various ways in which we often work toward change in various groups in which we participate. I'll tell you just a little bit about my background, which is not as interesting as Lawrence's. But I have worked in several groups which had to do with creating social change or creating environmental reformation and so on and so forth. And one of the things that I heard early on from someone in Move to Amend, which made sense to me, was a young woman said, just look around, and if you want to see change and it's not happening, look for the big money. Look for the big moneyed interests, because their interests are hardly ever the same as the interests of us individual people. My entire career has been as a teaching and research faculty at various universities. And at my last university, which was the University of Montana, from which I retired, we had a unionized faculty. And that was really my first indication of close up and personal how important unions could be. I had found during the whole process of tenure and promotion, which is an odd kettle of fish, an odd sort of process at many universities, that things were just unpredictable and somewhat irrational and, dare I say, sometimes unfair. And when I came finally to the University of Montana, which was a unionized faculty, I found how much more reasonable and rational and predictable things were for us as the workers at the university. Just one example, I once was in a situation where a complaint was made against me. And I wasn't there on my own. I was there supported by my union rep and with the strong support of the union behind me. Likewise, promotion and tenure and advancement are very much up in the air at a university where the faculty is not unionized. At a unionized faculty, we knew what was expected as long as I had performed up to standard. We knew that I would be tenured or I would be promoted. So that's sort of my story about how I came into union work, and how I came into Move to Amend is just basically by being involved in groups which were trying to engineer change and finding out how often the change we wanted was prevented by the influence of large money on our political system. So I'm going to use here mostly, and I think, Greg, did you put this in the chat yet? One of my favorite sources for this is a book called No Shortcuts, Organizing for Power in the New Gilded Age by a woman named Jane McAlevey. And you may know of her. If you've been in unions, you probably do. She's one of my heroes. And she's written several wonderful books about union organizing and how to make change and how to acquire power in the unions. And what she talks about with advocacy, mobilizing, and organizing as 3 different ways of working toward change. She says, let's look at each of these ways of working in 4 different ways. So let's think of each way of acting here has to do with a theory of power, a strategy, a relationship with regular people, and a goal. So let's first look at advocacy here. The theory of power, if you're in an advocate situation, is mostly based on a theory that the elite have power, that the few go to negotiate. Sometimes the negotiations are even behind doors. And if they're fortunate and clever, the elite can engineer power, can engineer change, can engineer success. So this is mostly the theory that the elite have power. Its strategy is that it advocates for certain approaches or certain changes, sometimes, as I said, behind closed doors, not with the multitudes of people who may be involved in the community, involved in their negotiation. The people focus does not really rely, if you think of it, and think of how you've been involved with movements for change throughout your life. Advocacy really doesn't rely on regular people at all. It relies on clever advocates to speak for regular people in the community and to be able to speak effectively and persuasively and engineer a change, get an agreement for change. But in advocacy, and this is mostly from Jane McAlevey, the aims are pretty small, pretty focused, and the policy change, if we advocate for policy change, it's going to be a pretty narrow change. Now, there's nothing wrong with advocacy, and there's nothing wrong with mobilizing. These are 3 different ways in which we all can act to work for change, but we need to know which is most effective when, and advocacy really is a rather elite way of approaching a situation. You come and you stand by, you're called in to support another group of people rather than being part of that community. Okay, Keon. Okay, next is mobilization. And we see a lot of mobilization these days. I think if you see something on television, it's often, at least in its effect, mobilization. It's the effect of mobilization. In mobilization, the theory of the power is that the power resides in an elite which can bring out the crowds, right? And sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. But this is the way, if you're a mobilizer or if you're involved in mobilizing, you believe that change is going to be created if you can bring out huge crowds to appear and to be noisy or whatever you want them to do. The strategy then is mostly a strategy of optics of crowds and agitation. Again, think how many times in the past few months we have, number one, been involved in things like this and seen lots of other people involved in them as well. This idea that the way to change things is by getting people together out where everybody can see them and making noise and talking about the issue. So it's basically an optical strategy. What a mobilizer wants to do then is mobilize people to show up for the action. Now, this takes us to the third one. The third point is that mobilization needs crowds of people if it's going to be considered successful. But any action is really not taken by those crowds. It's taken by individuals. Any decisions are not made by the crowd as a whole, any lasting decisions, but by individuals who then negotiate or agitate for particular change. And mobilization often, not always, but often seeks an inexpensive change, a change that can be talked about despite the fact that it's a fairly narrow policy change. And mobilization may or may not have the effect that you want. You can get, when I moved to North Carolina last winter, I went to a big march in Raleigh with the Poor People's Campaign and Reverend Barber and all of those folks. There were lots of people there. There was a lot of talk that went on, so on and so forth. The change which we would have liked was a large change, but by mobilizing itself, we were not able to achieve that change. So again, mobilizing can help. There are times when you want to mobilize, just as there are times when you want to advocate. But mobilizing itself does not necessarily build a power base which is going to last past this particular crisis or this particular situation. Okay, Kian, one more, please. And then we get to organizing. Okay, and here's what we wanted to talk about tonight, because as we were meeting in the Labor Caucus call, which we do every month on the fourth Wednesday of the month at 2 o'clock Eastern time, and everybody's welcome to come. As we were involved in one Labor Caucus call, Greg mentioned that he thought maybe you should talk about organizing, because we all think of ourselves as organizing, but we don't necessarily know exactly what that means. And so people who discuss organizing have a really specific way in which they think of it. And I think it's useful for us. And again, part of the story of me is that I work with numerous groups. I have worked with numerous groups in almost every, for social change, in almost every, on almost every occasion, we are much the same kind of people who are working for change. In my case, it tends to be white, middle class, maybe middle-aged people. And we all talk the same topic and we all think the problems are the same and so on. But we don't necessarily have a diverse bunch of people who are working with us and on whom we can count, because they are organizers and they are organized. So this is what organizing is. Organizing understands power as inclusive and collective, residing in regular people who are leaders in their own community and agitate on their own behalf. So I, Linda, am not going to make a plea for a group of people who are in some way challenged. Instead, those of us who face the challenge are all organizing amongst ourselves and speaking on our own behalf. The strategy and the goal are in organizing something of the same. That is, the strategy is to build power, which will persist not only through the present action, but through future causes as well. And again, one of the frustrations of working for change is that whenever you need people to show up or you need people to help with something, it's like starting all over again. The people aren't always there for the next event. And what organizing does is to build in those people who, because they know what the problems are and they can express their own problems and they know what the power structure is and they know how to exert their own power, are able to persist in their power for their community. And because of this, its people focus is virtually complete. That is, we educate ordinary people about the power structure and how to speak and act for themselves in effective ways. And decisions are made democratically by the members of the group, the community involved. not by an outsider, no matter how well intentioned, on behalf of the community. And then the goal is to build power, which will persist not only through this action, but because it's real community organic power will show up in the future when causes arise for community power. So this is the way I at least think about organizing, and I think of it as urging me, I'm not going to say us because we're all in different situations here, but urging me as a person who tends to be in something of a group with just people like me, white, middle class, 70-year-olds or whatever, to understand that it's important that I not be the person who determines what the problems are and how they should be solved, that determination has got to come from the community where the problems reside. Okay, so those are the differences among advocacy, mobilizing, and organizing. Okay, so next slide, please, Keon.
If there's a way, Linda, to speed up just a tad.
Pardon me?
If there's a way to just speed it up just a tad, since we are.
Oh, sure, yeah. I don't have to read all these because they're going to be right here on the slide, but 3 things. Organizing arises in the community itself. It's not an external thing. It is prefigurative, and this just means as we organize and as we work, we prefigure the way we want society to be once we've made the changes we want to make, right? And then it's based on conversation. Setting up relationships. Doesn't move quickly, but it moves. And so you can read here on the slide as well as I can read to you. Listen to people. You want to hear about their shared experiences. You want eventually maybe to offer yourself as a person who can assist them to solve their problems, to deal with their issues. And you want to help that person realize his or her power. Okay, Greg? Okay, good. So again, I won't read these all, just listen. Don't go in with the answers, just listen. Don't evangelize. Search together, connect our concerns as Move to Amend with the needs expressed in the community. Okay, and then I think we've got one more, and I'll zoom along here. And here are some takeaways. My own particular concern is whether I work with people who are not in my same class. And so if you'll go on down to the next slide, Keon. Oh, okay, that was it. If basically I just say to myself, if I'm a middle class person working with other middle class people to try to solve the problems of a marginalized group to which I do not belong, I'm probably not organizing. I'm advocating or I'm mobilizing. And what really gets stuff done is organizing. Okay, thanks. Thank you, Greg, for stepping in.
That point is also in the second sort of paragraph of that last.
Right, okay, good deal. Well, you'll be able to look at these, right?
Yeah, and just to let people know that we will, this is being recorded and this whole program will be made available, will be sent out to everyone who is on this call and everyone who is registered, so you don't have to feverishly be transcribed. All right, next up is Keon to talk about Move to Amend resources on organizing.
Yes, definitely, and really want to thank both Linda and Lawrence for their wonderful insight into organizing. And I'm learning new terms every day with prefigurative. In my mind, it's the word for imaginative, you know, because that is what organizing really comes down to, imagining what kind of world we are working towards. And we have a few resources that can help really expand our horizons to an extent, as well as materials that can be used to better organize and be effective within our community outreach. Because at the end of the day, grassroots organizing comes down to it comes from the ground up, and it comes to relationships. So with that, one of the key ways that we at Move to Amend provide for organizers to be effective and really do that authentic relationship building when it comes to grassroots organizing is through the movement education program. And this has evolved several times over the years. And right now it is a self-paced educational resource. Basically, you sign up by going to movetoamend.org/education3, and you can, and you'll see several modules that you can go at your own pace that really help to highlight and educate ourselves, not just on the history of people's-led movements, both how the past movements that came before us, particularly the labor movement, as well as the civil rights movement, the suffrage movement, and the LGBTQ movement, among others. Learning their successes and and their pitfalls, but also it educates us on how we interact with one another in the community, how corporate power explicitly builds and reinforces the systems of oppression that we are all raised within. White supremacy, cis heteropatriarchy, also racial classism. Among other series of oppressions. By completing this program, you'll come out with, as an organization, whether you're doing this as an organization or even just as an individual, it can come out with a clear democracy agreement template. We have templates in place that you can create a agreement for how you as an organization can govern yourself, or even just interact within your community. With peers and other outreach efforts that you make. It also comes with an outreach plan as well that will help you identify the key issues that you are most passionate about and want to focus in on, as well as the groups that are the frontline communities that are already engaged in these issues, and who you can take leadership from and support. We also have several resources available under our Take Action Toolkit. Most importantly, the Guide to Power Mapping, which will help you identify key targets within public office that you want to lean on and pressure to actually make these changes possible, identifying their influencers, as well as the community and issues that they organize with, or that they're most focused on. We also have several volunteer kits that are under this Take Action Toolkit, most notably the Public Education Kit, which provides a series of talking points and educational resources for how you can best raise awareness about the nature of corporate rule and how it directly impacts us within the local communities. We also have a political organizing kit that includes several lobbying guides for how you can approach leaders of elected office, but it also provides methods and ways to influence our public figures, both inside and outside elected government. So encourage you to look at those. And then we also have other tools, particularly our Take Action webinars, just like this, which you can go to movetoamend.org/webinars to catch up on everything from how to be a Move to Amend advocate to launching your own Move to Amend affiliate and or working group, among other ways, and organizing trainings such as how to use social media effectively, writing letters to the editor, and creating grassroots coalitions and alliances, particularly with communities of color. And beyond Move to Amend, there are so many organizing resources available outside, and some of the secure ways that will help build trust and help make your own communication secure in the increasingly fascist world, unfortunately. Signal is a free and open encrypted online chat service that you can download to your mobile phones. There's also Slack, Keybase, and for communicating and organizing your various projects with groups or individuals or communities. And there's also Hootsuite, which helps you to manage multiple social media accounts at once. So these are just a few within the pool of various organizing resources at your disposal.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Keon and Linda and Lawrence. I have opened the chat, so you can feel free at this point to share comments or questions. But before we get to your comments, questions, you can also do it in the Q&A at the bottom of the screen. So one, either or the other, one or the other. But if you want to share comments or questions with other people who are attending this, you can put it in the chat now, and you should be able to do that. But before we get to open-ended, we have this time set aside. We need to, I think, maybe focus 10 to 15 minutes on it, since we do want maybe 10 minutes, is if Linda and Lawrence and Keon in particular, three of you, what lessons do you think that organized workers, in organizing workers, and that type of coming together, that of organizing in labor, what are the lessons learned you think that are applicable for Move to Amend as it seeks to try to convince Congress and build a movement powerful enough to convince Congress to create this constitutional amendment? What are the takeaways from your experience, from what you shared tonight, that you can underscore, or that you haven't mentioned so far that you think are appropriate?
Back, Lawrence.
Go ahead, Lawrence.
Yeah, I'd like to say that I think virtually all of them are, that organizing really is organizing. And we actually have an advantage that you don't have in labor. In labor, when you're organizing, your job is on the line all the time, even if you have to go on strike. It's a really scary thing. You don't know if you're ever going to get to come back to your job or not. So there's a lot at stake. But we really have nothing to lose but our chains. When we all live under corporate rule, as long as we can keep our government from going full-on fascist, then us activists and organizers have a lot to worry about. But and if we can, it's sort of a race. If we can get to our government first and give it back to the people before the corporations take over and use technology against us, then we've got it relatively easy. They say in labor that the best organizer is the worst boss. Well, Trump is like a gift to the movement of the people that we've never had before. And actually to see these Republicans and that they really are just pure corporate pirates. I think that if you go to any of those links that I included for how labor organizes and how they did organize, it really is just in establishing relationships. When I go to Indivisible or I go to Our Revolution, I'm using organizing all the time. I'm doing deep organizing. I'm becoming friends, colleagues, and they know where I stand. They know that I love Move to Amend. And virtually everybody in my sphere of influence in the Bay Area has already endorsed Move to Amend. They're all on board. Pass.
Linda, you're reflecting.
Sure. I guess specifically, I think one of the issues that we have had in Montanans Move to Amend, and a couple of my colleagues are on, they may speak, is that so many people, that there are so many issues on which people are working. It's really a hopeful thing that so many people are now working to make change. I mean, that gives me great hope. But those people each have their own focus, right? Because there's a particular situation they're dealing with. And I think one of the things that I've learned about organizing is that I would apply to Move to Amend is we must listen to where people are and what is concerning them and what their work is, and then show them how Move to Amend is related to that, how corporate rule so often affects where they're living. So I've heard Greg say before this matter of amending the Constitution and corporate rule and so on, it doesn't have to do with an issue like healthcare or education or even COVID. It has to do with the rules by which the game is played. And that's just the way we think of Move to Amend. Under every issue, there is this rule that the corporations have more power than we do. And I think it's very, very important that we be able to, as we involve ourselves in groups and work with our friends and so on, we need to be able to listen to them and find out what their experience is, and then try to respond to that experience from the point of view of corporate personhood or corporate power, corporate rule, or however we want to talk about it, and the inordinate amount of control big money has taken over our political and economic lives. So I think that's it, that we have to listen. We can't just charge in with Move to Amend, but we have to listen and find out where people are coming from and care about that, and then try to say, have you thought of this? Here's what I'm thinking. What would you think about this?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, from the outside looking in terms of lessons of organizing workers for Move to Amend, what do you think?
Well, I mean, from the outside looking in, I would say like this, I would emphasize, you know, what Lawrence and Linda had to say, and like really just bring home the point that's been made of like, for Move to Amend in particular, like, I mean, I personally view this issue as not a political issue. This is a human rights issue for me that intersects with every struggle for justice happening today. I may not be as directly involved in the labor movement, but I am directly involved within the racial justice movement. And honestly, I mean, the fact that corporations are able to have the same human rights as you or me, through an amendment that was intended specifically for me and my ancestors to protect our civil liberties following the abolition of one form of slavery. But as long as they are able to have those same human rights that me and our ancestors have fought, like have, you know, struggled, bled, and died for, and their political spending is considered a form of protected speech under the First Amendment, we as human beings in our communities can't assert our rights better or more effectively than these artificial entities created by state law. And we can see that here and now within the current, current political moment that we're in, where we are literally dependent upon the goodwill of corporations in places like the big tech industry, social media companies, to keep the fomenting of violent fascist insurrection from really taking a deeper hold than it already has. And we've also seen it as bright as day within the government's response at all levels to the COVID-19 pandemic, where the vast trillions of dollars that have been allocated to address this crisis, public health crisis, is going mostly to the largest multinational corporations that exist out there. So I mean, like, I hope that kind of speaks to the answer of to the crux of the question. Outside looking in, I mean, this is a struggle for human rights of our time, and it's my goal, and my impression of this is like, this isn't the end all be all. This isn't going to fix the systemic dysfunction that is rooted within our current government, our current country here in the United States. This is just the first step towards leveling the playing field for all respective movements, so that we can actually have a deeper conversation of what a participatory democracy looks like when people in the planet are put are put first, not corporate wealthy profit or business interests. And to make clear, and also to make clear that we're, that what that looks like in practice. It's my vision when I first joined in Move to Amend to have deeper conversations on expanding the Constitution, whether it should actually be a human rights document as opposed to the property rights document that effectively is today. And it's my vision for that conversation of what if we had an actual bill of labor rights that expressly enshrines the right to paid leave, the right to leisure, the right to choose, the freedom to choose meaningful employment and labor that suits our needs and our interests. These are just the tip of the iceberg of what we could actually have if we can actually get these multinational corporations and their large scale industries out of the way and out of our political discourse.
May I just say one more thing? And that is the whole idea of solidarity is the union idea. We cannot fight any of these things, any of these fights on our own. We have to understand that we have common challenges. We experience them somewhat differently, but we have common challenges and we have to fight it together. And that's what unions are about. Solidarity forever. The unions make us strong. And we don't have money in Move to Amend. So we better have people. I mean, that's the way we think of it. So that's just a basic union lesson that I've taken away that I think we can't forget about in Move to Amend.
If I might, before we open it up to, and there's some wonderful comments and queries that have been shared so far. In just listening to all three of you, what sticks out to me, and the word that has not been overtly used, that I think speaks to the crux of the ultimate goal of, listening and building relationships and trying to identify where people are and starting where people are and trying to use that in an authentic way, when we say we're trying to do this to organize people. Is it not to build power? I mean, we are trying to build enough force that's genuine, that's authentic, that is democratic, that is nonviolent, that respects people, that, obviously there have been some unions that have been more diverse than others, more inclusive than others, and the like. But certainly overall, as an institution, labor has done a much better job than many institutions in our societies to respect people and to build bottom-up power to try to take on the institutions of society that have been used or misused by the wealthy and the corporate interests. And that is something that Move to Amend is trying to do, obviously, is that we are going against these incredibly potent forces. And to authentically, I think, build democracy, you've got to build relationships. You've got to talk to people. You've got to find out what people are interested in, start from that and converse with them and do it in a real way. But at the same time, while you're doing this one-on-one, my gosh, there's 330 million people in this country. I mean, can we really do all of this one-on-one? We have to sort of at the same time, kind of almost paradoxically, think bigger and do some of the mobilizing and movement building that labor does. Yeah, labor goes and works one-on-one, but they also are trying to build a national movement, not just internally with other labor organizations, but with other organizations, with religious groups, with community organizations. Jobs with Justice is an example of bringing all those kinds of groups together. Well, that's what Move to Amend is it not trying to do. Yes, sort of work on our own internally when it makes sense, but at other times when it makes sense to build a movement and to form a coalition. So we're both trying to do things at the grassroots, and we're trying to build a coalition, and we're trying to build a movement. And we're trying to do this all at the same time, which almost doesn't make sense, but it's also the only way. I don't know.
Good.
So anyway, that's my takeaways from what you.
I agree 100%.
Yes. Amen, brother.
All right. So we've gotten some questions, comments. Let me see here. Why don't I throw these out and people can respond to them. Rich Procida asks, when you say that this organization is grassroots and organized from the bottom up, are you talking about certain types of ideas and ideologies? Or are you saying that members decide the group ideology, strategy, and policy? If the latter, how did you ensure that you are actually hearing and incorporating the input of your members?
Good question.
Good question. Anybody want to take that on? Keon?
Ensuring how that you are actually hearing and incorporating the input of your members. I mean, any other time besides COVID, I would say that actually having in-person conversations is the way to go. But in lieu of not being able to do that, there are mediums just like we're on right now, Zoom. There's also Jitsi, which is a free alternative to Zoom that's actually encrypted and allows people to do most of the same features as Zoom, but for free and through your browser or your phone. But I mean, when it comes to ensuring that people are actually heard and incorporating the input of membership, it's really just key to can make sure you're talking with people one-on-one. Actually taking the time to build those one-on-one relationships is still, even in this, this digital age, the most effective means of building collective community power to grassroots organize. Because if you're talking with people one-on-one, you're and you're actually listening to them, not just reacting to what they're saying, but actually listening and incorporating it, taking time to consider that, you can make sure and help to elevate those points and issues that you do, but just by learning and then bringing that up into the organizing spaces in the group's main organizing spaces. But yeah, there really is no substitute to those building those one-on-one relationships with each other to help mobilize and educate and learn from one another.
May I just say, on a practical level in Move to Amend, and I don't know whether you're talking about just Move to Amend or how does—
I think the question is specific to Move to Amend.
Okay, Move to Amend. As a practicality, we have a couple of opportunities. One is a collaborative call amongst the affiliates. So not all states have affiliates, but some states have more than one. And these are just sort of the local groups. And every month there are 2 phone calls, which include a whole lot of folks, not everybody, but there is an affiliate call, which has at least one representative from every affiliate, in which members of the board, the national board and the national team, sort of let us know what's going on at their level, what they're thinking about, and ask for our input. And then there's also a call, I think we call it a call of collaboration.
Right.
Every month. This was established maybe a year ago. I think Millie Harmon's on here. She would know how long, but maybe a year ago, because members of the affiliates wanted to be able to talk amongst ourselves rather than just sort of filter everything through the national team. So those have been really good. And we just have, if there's a problem or a concern that comes from Montanans Move to Amend, then we can present it. We create the agenda. And the agenda should be based on things that we as affiliates, which means we as people who work in neighborhoods, are concerned about. So I think, in a
practical sense, that makes sense. Yeah, absolutely. And appreciate you, Linda, for raising those 2 methods. And other ways too that we do our best to hear directly from membership is through our social media streams. We have we have a monthly live stream broadcast on Facebook and Twitter called Move to Amend Live Report, where we have members of the national team, usually our national director, Caitlin Sposi-Belknap, who gives gives an overview of the month's events and shares the analysis from Move to Amend, as well as updates on everything that we are doing. But it also allows for our supporters and members to communicate and actually chime in and ask questions in real time, which we will answer for you. There's also our weekly live stream that we just began last year, which is called Making Sense with Move to Amend. And this is where, this is a weekly broadcast that we do where we actually talk about the current events that have happened in the week and give our respective takes, as well as invite guests on to talk about these issues and the current events. And that's also another way that our members and listeners can chime in and ask direct questions of us, as well as share insights with who is tuning in and whatnot.
Okay, great. So there's a lot of different entry points to get into. We got a lot of other questions, so let's get to them if we can. Let's see here.
There's also lots of questions in the Q&A and in the chat, so I'm not sure if you're monitoring both of them.
Yeah, I'm trying to do both here. So
okay,
how about...
I wanted to lift up a question from Paul Karsh of, is pursuit of specific objectives a tactic for building power, i.e. building power, not an abstract objective in itself? I mean, I'd say it's like, is building power not an abstract objective in and of itself?
To me, it's not, because to me, nothing can happen without power. Like everybody wants to see a different world. Most everybody sees corruption and they want change, but change can't happen without power. So to me, everything is based on building power, and you can't build power without organizing. I mean, it's really people power versus the power of money. That's where we're at right now. Corporations have money, and unfortunately their money is now their constitutional right to free speech, which makes me crazy. But we have people power, and assuming we organize, without organizing, we don't have any countervailing force, and we'll never pass the We the People Amendment. Pass.
There's a question here I thought was interesting about why is it that we chose to look at lessons to move to amend from a labor perspective. Why didn't we choose, say, civil rights or suffrage or some other kind of mechanism or medium to sort of look at ways to bring about change to move to amend? I would just say the short answer to that is because we within the Labor Caucus decided, well, let's talk about power from our unique prism, which has certain unique qualities to it. But you know what? If civil rights or suffrage or some other, movement grouping and constituency had chosen to do what we're doing tonight, there would certainly be differences, some, but there would certainly be some similarities. Maybe the words and the languages and the phrases, and certainly some of the history would be different, but some of the social movements, democracy movements, grassroots movements that have occurred throughout our nation's history have been when many of these individual-like groups and constituencies came together. Civil rights involved not just sort of religious organizations, but labor organizations. And there were many other groups that were involved in that, et cetera. So that's sort of why we're doing this. We have other groupings, and at some point, those other groupings may want to choose to do the same thing we're doing here tonight. Let's see. Regarding the one question I see in the Q&A, I think it would be helpful to clarify the We the People Amendment would make it possible for Congress to pass regulatory laws that could not be overturned by the Supreme Court using the precedents of corporate personhood, money of speech. That's Margaret Coster. Absolutely true. Paul again, how do we keep our civil liberties as we fight fascism? Biden wrote the Patriot Act, after all. I hear he may have even more restrictions. What do we think about that?
Yeah, I think that it's important to remember that the problem doesn't just lie within one party. You know, this is a two-party duopoly that our political discourse in this country are controlled over. And as I tell many people in the community that I organize with, both parties are two sides of the same coin being passed between the same hands. So really, I mean, if we're talking about, you know, keeping our civil liberties as we fight fascism, it's really important to stay focused on the root problems rather than reacting to just the symptoms of the problem. Like, let's remember, Donald Trump is not the problem that, like, is not the biggest problem that we have. He's not a root problem. He is a symptom of a deeper root problem, which comes back to the founding problem that put property and profit above human rights and well-being, as well as the planet. So if we're going to really maintain our and keep our civil liberties, we're going to have to fight not just fascists, but we're also going to have to fight those who sympathize or sympathize with fascists or are enabling that fascism to take root.
May I agree? I mean, may I say, I agree with you, Keon.
Yes, you may agree.
Yes, I may agree. And the other thing I'd like to say is just that we cannot depend on Joe Biden or anybody else to defend our civil liberties. We must be ready to do it ourselves. And I don't know what that's going to include. I suspect it's going to include a lot of organizing and mobilizing. And I know Keon's been involved in a lot of mobilizing lately. I think it's perfectly clear that we cannot elect a president and expect him or her to defend our civil rights for us. We've got to be in their faces one way or the next all the time.
Yep. Just in the chat, Millie Harmon reminded us in response to your comment, Linda, yes, the call of collaboration has been going a couple of years now. And Geneva
Thanks. And yep. Millie coordinates that.
Millie coordinates that, does a spectacular job. And Keon, I think, helps. And Jason and others, George Friday as well. Geneva Oman, hey, Geneva, I think we spoke fairly recently. In chat says, in follow-up, lessons learned from other movements, sort of in response to that previous comments we were making, are covered in Move to Amend's education program, the movement education program. Absolutely true. There's some readings, some questions, some queries for reflection in that. So if you're part of this effort and want to be, if not yet, please reach out to us. But all groups that are affiliates go through that. Sue Kirchmeier says, reflects, it would be interesting to look at other movements within the framework of the three areas of advocacy, mobilizing, and organizing, Linda, that you mentioned, to see which they concentrated on: civil rights, women, suffrage, etc.
And I'd say that you're probably right, Sue. That would be interesting. And we looked at organizing today because we're the Labor Caucus. And again, that's the way labor has tended to work. But you're right. And they're not mutually exclusive.
Right. Let's see here. There's some comments or questions. Joe Ely says, formerly with the California Clean Money Campaign, the enablers of a whole host of things here. Yikes, you name it, it's listed here. MTA is a very powerful movement for political justice. When we talk about justice, we oftentimes do not think about economic justice, social justice, even more recently, environmental justice. But one way to think about, democracy and authentic self-governance, self-determination, whatever you want to call it, of which the We the People Amendment is a piece of, is political justice. So quite right. Let's see. Hello, Byron says, my first Move to Amend meeting, although I've been on many of our Revolution Zoom calls. And certainly, as an example of an organization that labor and other organizations work with, and some Move to Amenders, in fact, work with, is our revolution, whether at a local level, state, etc. So that is an example. Indivisible is another. civil rights organizations, yet another whole category of organizations, religious related. We have an interfaith caucus that is evolving. It's going to be shifting into becoming more focused on ecological concerns, be it climate or otherwise, believing that strategically as we shift from one cataclysmic problem of the pandemic to an ongoing cataclysmic problem of the environment, that environmental concerns is extremely important, and those working constituency on environmental concerns are an important group to work with. And that is certainly a way to broaden and deepen our relationship with other groups, again, as a means to build power.
We also have, since we're talking about these caucuses, don't we also have a next generation caucus or something like that? I mean, isn't there a new?
Yeah, it's kind of dormant at the moment, but we're thinking it.
And we used to do a kind of arts
and culture
caucus, and anybody's welcome to join up and be part of the call.
Right. Another example of sort of connecting is I'm new. This is Jacqueline. How many people are here? Let's see. There have been about, at its peak, about 60. Who are you? Where are you? Well, good question. Who are we? We're people concerned about this issue of real, authentic democracy who have operated under the hat of this organization, Move to Amend. We're from all over, from coast to coast. Is there anyone here from South Oregon? I don't know. If there is, please ID yourself in the chat, and we can connect you with Jacqueline. There are some Move to Amenders in Oregon. I'm not quite sure what parts. I know there have been some activity in Salem, in Portland. I think there's still a group in Portland and elsewhere around the state. I just finished working a few months with Focus 2020, a small group that recruited 2,400 poll workers for Pennsylvania and about 20,000 workers in Georgia, turning both elections blue. Had Nate Purcell and other expert advisors. Congratulations. That is very impressive. And what happened in Georgia was stunning.
It's people.
And so I'm just looking here. I know there is them here in Ashland. Just wondered what your name is. Yeah, our name is Move to Amend. Right. The person, I don't know who's in the Move to Amend block. Probably one of our staff that is maybe doing some other things at the moment. Oh, it's Millie. Okay. Any other questions, comments?
You are too.
Right. Maybe I am, right. Lorraine, has someone read that yet? One-on-one, I'll get it right. Relationships are obviously very important, but given they are trying to pass law over a country of 300 million, it's quite clear we must build coalitions with existing groups. Clearly, the way to build this movement is by connecting with other groups, such as many others that are listed there. It seems to me that we must train speakers for Move to Amend so that Move to Amend speakers can go to the groups which already exist and educate them on our cause, then join with them and build coalitions. Sadly, the rights of workers have taken tremendous hits these past 50 years, and the labor movements need to be reborn. Move to Amend were to assist worker groups in their own organizing efforts. This would greatly enhance Move to Amend in workers' eyes. I would say it's all of it. I know it just seems, like, wow, we have limited resources. Let's kind of focus in and hone in. And on the one hand, Lorraine, exactly right. We do need to go out. And we were doing that in the flesh in terms of high touch before the pandemic, and doing things that we called barnstorming tours, where we would go out to existing communities where there were already active groups or groups who were trying to organize and bring together people who were concerned about these issues, but also concerned about those single issues, none of which was going to be very effectively accomplished without getting this sort of horizontal issue. We say these single issues, not going to get anywhere unless you sort of focus on the strategy, single strategy of opening things up. So yeah, we were doing that. And, when the pandemic hit, we kind of shifted to focus more on quote unquote virtual barnstorm tours, where we would try to consciously and deliberately, when we would go to a geographic place virtually, invite people in from other organizations, including labor, but other groups as well, frontline communities, to talk about and see where there's connections and bridges to be built. But we got to do it all. Where there's opportunities to talk to people one-on-one. When we have our Move to Amend petition on the street, let's do the one-on-one. When there's opportunities to connect in this way with other groups, let's do that. And when there's opportunities to be more in the background in supporting, not being on the lead or not even being sort of equal, but supporting, let's do that. Where it makes sense, let's do that.
Just got another question here from Kathy Allers. Isn't part of the whole power dynamic between individuals, communities, and the big corporations the issue of data privacy, e.g. like the EU personal data privacy laws and the one in California?
Who's our California contingent here? Lawrence, Keon, any idea?
Mr. California.
Yeah, like isn't part of the whole power dynamic between individuals, communities, and big corporations. I mean, it comes to like, it's part of it, most definitely. I mean, information is in of itself power, you know, and is can be used for good or for great evil, depending on like who's wielding it. So in terms of like, the issue, like when it comes to the issue of data privacy, like, you know, we are, I would say like, it is another one of those issues that we as Move to Amend, like need to like are highlighting and raising with, you know, how all of our information is basically being sold to the highest bidder when we participate in online social media platforms such as Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. When we use Google search engines, they can literally track what websites we go to, what searches we put into, and then use that information to sell it to third parties and then direct advertisement directly to us to encourage us to buy, to consume, and to participate within this corporate power structure and give corporations more power. It is another, it's another in so many stories that we've heard of, like the direct impacts of corporate rule. And it's something that we are not the, like we're not going to be the champions of, but we are connecting the dots between the organizations and frontline communities that are engaged in this fight for data privacy. Those include the Electronic Frontiers. I'm sorry, the EFI is what I'm blanking on. I'm blanking on their name at the moment. There is the free. There are several free press institutions that are doing this. I'm blanking on the names off the top of my head, but yeah, there are a number of different organizations that are engaging with, and like what we encourage here at Move to Amend is what several of us have talked about already is organizing in solidarity with these groups. We're not the ones that are going to be the lead on these respective issues such as data privacy, but we're going to support those that are on the front lines waging these fights. And if we can actually pass the We the People amendment, it stands to help the fight for data privacy. If we can actually make it clear that these big tech corporations do not have the same rights or First Amendment privileges as we the people.
We're coming up near the bottom of the hour, which we want to end on, but let's just deal with these last couple of questions that I'm seeing in the chat. A congressman asserts HJR 48, We the People Amendment, would threaten Democratic clubs. Why don't we put in labor organizations as well? Since I'm sure those of us who have worked with or tried to work with union, well, wait a second, isn't this going to affect labor groups in terms of taking money out of, how are we going to, you know, contribute or invest in public officials that we want to try to respond and be supportive of labor groups? So whether it's Democratic clubs or labor organizations, Linda, Lawrence, what do you respond? Is this a threat? We the People Amendment.
Well, I'll start it, and I would hope that Keon will pile up on top of me. But just real quickly, I actually happen to know exactly what Gordon's talking about. He's a friend of mine. And that question is coming from somebody in a Democratic club that is kind of agreeing with one of the very few congressional reps that is not on board and not co-sponsoring HJR 48 in our area. In our local area, virtually every congressional rep is on board. I am completely, his concerns completely confound me, because all these organizations already have the rights of individuals within the organization. They have the right to associate, to form groups. They think that, or this one person thinks that they need to have corporate personhood and money as speech so that their property won't be taken away from them. And can you answer that, Keon?
Yeah, so I mean, when it comes to the issue, like how this would threaten Democratic clubs, it's important to remember that for-profit corporations are not treated the same way as, or are not treated the same way as other organizations. Unions are not treated the same way as for-profit corporations. In fact, they're subject to even greater scrutiny than any for-profit corporation through the National Labor Act. But also nonprofits are not treated the same way. In fact, nonprofit organizations, which Democratic clubs by their definition technically are, a lot of them are, they are, nonprofits actually have standing to speak on behalf of the rights of their membership. And that's been recognized in the Supreme Court as far back as 1930s. In fact, the NAACP versus Alabama is one of the cases that I'm thinking of. And then there's also NAACP, I think, versus Virginia or one case. But like basically, the Supreme Court has found that nonprofits don't actually need their constitutional rights separate from its memberships. It is already a voice, an amplifier, basically for its membership to speak on the behalf of those rights. And that's going to be maintained even if we pass HJR 48, because we clearly stipulate in the first article that artificial entities, which include corporations, unions, and nonprofits like Move to Amend and the Democratic clubs, are subject to regulation by the people through local, state, and federal law, meaning that we can actually codify what those what those specific privileges are through statute that they have. And it would also stipulate that none of the privileges that we describe or give to these artificial entities, including the Democratic clubs, can be construed as inherent or inalienable, meaning that if they violate our laws, our direct principles, like as described in the Constitution, we as a people have a mechanism for holding them accountable, either by removing those particular rights or privileges, or outright dissolving the organization itself if it proves necessary. This was possible before corporations were were recognized as people under the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause, and it can easily be done so again.
Another thing that I would just add really quickly is that unions and all the good organizations, they never claim these unjust rights, whereas corporations know how to use them with their high-priced lawyers. I actually asked this question specifically to our union attorney that represents Teamsters and the Alameda Labor Council, and that's exactly what he told me. That and what you said also, Keon, that they have, basically corporations have special treatment and unions have special treatment. And it's all bad for unions and good organizations, and all good for corporations. Pass.
Yeah, it's hard to compete with a for-profit entity that has bottomless coffers, and unions, by their definition, are nonprofit, right? So
that's what it is. It's their money. With their money and their lawyers, they can get anything with these unjust rights and powers.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Yep. All right. Last thing is, have we reached out to veterans service organizations? This comes from Chris, a retired Army officer, I believe Move to Amend will appeal to veterans. Veterans for Peace, we've reached out to. They are a supporter, an endorser, one of several hundred organizations. If you go to movetoamend.org, /endorsements, I believe it is, you will see the very long list of organizations. That is one, but that's about the only, I think, veterans group, whether it's national or affiliate. If you have some other suggestions, please reach out to us. You can reach me directly. I'm putting my email in the chat, greg@movetoamend.org. Whoops.
And may I just add something to that, Greg?
Yep.
If you're a veteran and you think that veterans might be interested in this, then maybe that's your organizing task, right? If they're your community and you all know what the issues are that make veterans, I don't know what the issues are that make veterans, would make veterans concerned about this, but you all do. So that's your organizing. And if you talk to them and say, how do you guys feel about this? How do you ladies feel about this? Then tell them, you know, there's movetoamend.org. I think it's an interesting place. We could do a Zoom, couldn't we? I mean, that's one of the advantages of Zoom. If you, the questioner, had 10 people who wanted to just get together and have an evening when we could have a Zoom, I see no reason why we couldn't, right? And that's one of the good things of being connected electronically as we are now, that we can get together with people who can't all show up at the same place. So I would say that's, you're an organizer. You could be an organizer amongst your own community of veterans because you know what the issues are and you begin to see how Move to Amend might be a way of approaching those issues and building power to change things. So I think that's a great example of where organizing is just going to be an answer. Yeah. Good for you. Keep in touch.
There's values such as integrity and respect. So less issues and more values in a sense.
Oh yeah. I mean, we're talking about amending one of the biggest values documents in our constitutional, in our law system, our legal system, the Constitution itself. I mean, those rights that we have enumerated within those, even though they may be few, they are statements of principle that define, that set clear limits on how the government, which is supposed to be subordinate and accountable to we the people, because we're the ones that actually hold the political power, can actually, the limits, it defines the limits of how the government can use its powers on our behalf. And imagine what we could accomplish and actually do as a free sovereign people if we actually enshrined more of the values that we the people actually share and hold true to us as human beings.
All right, I think we're going to close up just sort of as a closing. Move to Amend here in 2021 for the first 3 months is all hands on deck approach in trying between now and the end of March, early April, in securing 100 co-sponsors for HJR 48, the We the People Amendment. So we're trying something a little different to this 2-year cycle, which will be the 117th session of the United States Congress. Instead of sort of dragging it out for the whole year and a half or 2 years, we're trying to really put a lot of emphasis in trying to get 25 more than we had in the last session, from 75 to 100, both as a means of sort of getting this off the table, way to build momentum, of inspiring, to use as a stepping stone to work on other projects and the like. So one of the takeaways from tonight, in a sense, is to, if you're interested in this, we're having a separate webinar next week on the 21st, the 11th anniversary of Citizens United. In the follow-up to the email that's going to go out tomorrow or the next day, I'll include the link to that webinar. Certainly all of you are invited to participate in that and see what you can do if you're interested in helping reach out to your congressperson to join others, hopefully 99 others at least, to become 100 co-sponsors to We the People. And in the course of doing that, there could be some organizing opportunities to reach out to others in your community who have felt needs, who could join you on a Zoom call to meet with your congressional aide or congressperson, him or herself. So that might be an excuse, if you will, organizing excuse, to reach out and to have some other speakers dealing with other felt needs and to show and make those connections to ending corporate personhood and money as speech. But apart from that, once this goal is accomplished, there certainly is ongoing efforts underway and will be underway to use these basic principles of organizing from the grassroots, as well as coalition building and movement building, all of this together to both broaden and deepen this, this movement. So thank you for being a part of this, and hopefully we will continue to cross message lines, whether it's physically or virtually. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. Forward together. Thanks,
Solidarity.
Take care.
Thanks, y'all.